Right, so you want to really understand this InstructGPT everyone's talking about, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Not just the surface level stuff, but like the details that really make it different.
Yeah,
And who has time to read a whole research paper?
right.
That's what we're here for. That's why you sent over these excerpts from the original InstructGPT paper.
Absolutely.
Let's dive in.
What's really cool about InstructGPT is that it's not about making a bigger language model. It's about making them better.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What makes it better?
Well, you got these large language models like GPT-3 that are trained on just massive data sets of text.
Mm-hmm.
And they get really good at predicting the next word,
Right.
which sounds impressive, but
But just predicting the next word doesn't necessarily mean that it understands what you want it to do.
it's exactly. You can ask GPT-3 to summarize a news article, and it might give you a poem about, like, the weather or something.
So it's like GPT-3 could write an amazing song about pizza, but if you ask it for directions to the best pizza place in town,
Right.
it gives you the instructions on how to make dough from scratch.
Exactly. That's the thing that InstructGPT is trying to solve, is making these language models better at following instructions.
Okay, so how do you teach a language model to follow instructions? It's not like you can just hand it a rule book.
Right. It's a multi-step process.
Yeah.
The paper compares it to how we teach children,
Okay.
which I think is a really useful analogy.
Yeah, I like that analogy. So are we talking about like rewarding it with virtual gold stars when it does something good?
It's a bit more complicated than that. But essentially, yes.
Yeah.
They gather these, what they call demonstrations of good behavior, which are human-written examples of instructions being followed correctly. And then they train a model on that data.
So you're showing a kid how to bake a cake step by step. Here's how you measure flour. Now you crack the eggs.
Exactly. You wouldn't just hand them the ingredients and expect them to figure it out on the first try.
Right.
You show them. You guide them.
Makes sense.
Mm.
But how do they teach the language model to behave beyond just those initial examples? Because humans, we're complex.
Yeah.
We don't always agree on what good looks like. We don't always agree on what good looks like.
Yeah, and that's where it gets even more interesting. They collect data where they have humans compare different model outputs
Okay.
and judge which one is better, more helpful, more on point.
Huh?
And they use that data to train a separate reward model.
Oh, interesting. So it's like we're showing the AI all these different ways that humans could respond.
Yeah.
And then we're saying like, okay, these are the good ones. These are the ones that we actually like.
Exactly. It's giving it a crash course in human preferences,
I like it.
right? Instead of, like you said, art school critiques, it's all about following instructions well.
Exactly.
Okay.
So once they have this reward model, how do they actually use it?
So the reward model learns to predict which outputs humans would prefer. And that is then used to actually guide the main language model
Okay.
during reinforcement learning. So it's like, okay, you've done this initial training. Now we're going to fine-tune you based on what we know humans like.
Gotcha. So it's not just mimicking the examples anymore. It's like internalizing the preferences behind them.
Exactly. It's about aligning the AI's outputs with what we actually find valuable.
Okay, so all of this sounds really promising, but in the real world, how much better is InstructGPT than just using the original GPT-3?
Yeah, so get this. In their tests, people actually preferred the outputs from a 1.3 billion parameter InstructGPT model
Okay.
over the massive 175 billion parameter GPT-3 model.
Wait, so smaller was better.
Yeah,
It's not just about the size, it's about how you train it.
exactly. It's not just about the size, it's about how you actually use it and how you train it.
That's wild. So it's like saying that a small team of really well-trained chefs could outperform a huge kitchen full of less experienced cooks.
That's a great analogy, and it really highlights how important this alignment is.
So are there any downsides to this approach? Because it can't all be good, right?
Right. You're thinking like a true scientist. There's always a catch.
There's always a trade-off.
And in this case, the researchers call it the alignment tax.
The alignment tax.
Yeah, basically sometimes focusing too much on following instructions can actually hurt the model's performance on other tasks.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like if you become so good at following recipes that you forget how to experiment in the kitchen.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it.
So how do they prevent that? How do they prevent the AI from becoming too narrow in its focus?
So InstructGPT tries to minimize this alignment tax by mixing in some training from the original data set.
Oh, okay.
So it's like reminding the AI, hey, you were pretty good at other things before. Don't lose those skills.
Keep it well-rounded.
Exactly.
I like it. So InstructGPT is more aligned with what we want, but is it perfect? Have we reached AI nirvana?
Not quite. There are still limitations. And it comes back to what we were talking about before, about how even humans don't always agree on what good looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, even humans don't always agree on what good looks like, and that makes it tough to teach an AI.
Right, because we learn by example, but also by trial and error and figuring things out for ourselves.
Exactly. And InstructGPT can still get tripped up sometimes.
Okay. In what ways?
Well, for one thing, it can sometimes be tricked into giving incorrect or misleading information.
Really? How so?
Like if you phrase a question a certain way or give it a bunch of bad information as context, it might not catch on.
So it's still susceptible to those kinds of tricks.
Yeah, it hasn't quite mastered that whole critical thinking thing yet. And then there's the issue of it being overly cautious sometimes.
Overly cautious? You mean
Like giving really long, rambling answers to even simple questions.
so hedging its bets a bit.
Exactly. It's still learning to find that balance between being comprehensive and being concise.
Fascinating. So it sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done. What are the researchers focusing on now to make InstructGPT even better?
Well, one thing they're doing is something called adversarial training.
Adversarial training. What's that?
It's kind of like trying to break the model on purpose.
Break it.
Yeah. In a way, they'll throw all sorts of weird and challenging instructions at it just to see what throws it off.
So they're trying to find its weaknesses.
Exactly. By identifying those weaknesses, they can then figure out ways to improve the model, make it more robust.
That makes sense. It's like giving it a really tough exam with all kinds of trick questions.
Precisely. And that actually highlights something really important about this whole field of AI research. It's not like we're dealing with a finished product here. It's an ongoing process of refinement.
Right. It's constantly evolving and improving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is just the beginning.
Well, I, for one, am excited to see where it goes next. So to wrap things up for our listeners today, we've taken a deep dive into InstructGPT. We've explored how it uses human feedback to become better at following instructions, and we've delved into some of its limitations and the ongoing efforts to improve it.
It's been a great discussion.
And for anyone listening who's now as fascinated by InstructGPT as we are, here's something to ponder. If you could give an AI any instruction in the world, what would it be and how would you ensure that it understood exactly what you meant? Think about it. It's a question bigger than all of us.